Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Now listen, any fantasy football take could end up being the coldest take ever, right? Even ones that seem pretty safe. With that being said, I've got to get into this Kyren Williams thing. Now look, I listen to all the shows that we all listen to in the summertime when we're gearing up for fantasy football. All the popular ones, even some of the not so popular ones like this channel. But I've just been really surprised how down everyone is on Kyren Williams. I don't really understand it from a fantasy football perspective or really any other perspective. And I'm actually completely on the opposite end of the spectrum as a lot of these people. There's a lot of commentators that just seem like they're trying to drum up reasons to fade Kyren. And I just don't really get it because this is a game where one of the main commodities that's really hard to find is running back production. And that's all Kyren has done the last couple of years is be a top 10 running back. And we don't even really need to break much down to see how good and effective he is, at least on the Rams, which is one of the key points, right? I think some people think if Kyren went to a different team, he wouldn't be as effective. Well, it's a good thing he's on the Rams then, because he's really good on the Rams, and that's the team that he plays for until further notice. They're talking about extending his contract, but they haven't done so yet, so you got to figure out if that's just lip service or not. However, we're looking at a player that's topped 1,100 rushing yards in both seasons where he's been a top 10 running back. And then in the passing game, he doesn't do a whole lot, but he has over 30 receptions the last 2 years as well, and 5 touchdowns in 2 years. So this is a highly effective player who has proven twice now that they're capable of 15-plus touchdowns in a season. Now, you tell me when the last time was in fantasy that you had a running back available to you that was 25 years old, in a good offense, and has put up stats the last 2 years that you weren't that interested in because you heard someone somewhere say that they weren't that efficient of a runner. Because that's really the only thing that the Kyren haters have to hang their hat on, is that he's not that efficient. And that's fine. I mean, you can't argue with those statistics. And I don't want to bash advanced metrics and advanced stats. That's not what I'm here to do. For the most part, these stats are useful, but they're only pieces of the puzzle. So we can't go too crazy. I mean, I think we overcomplicate things in fantasy sometimes where it's like, well, this guy plays well and scores a ton of fantasy points, but on the other hand, his broken tackle metrics aren't that good. It's like, at what point are you throwing out all these minuscule stats that don't even tell the whole story? And I think with Kyren, this is a blatant example of you don't have to worry about broken tackle metrics and yards per carry as much. They're still relevant, sure, but this is another example of some trepidation I have when fantasy football people use statistics. So last year, Kyren only averaged 4.1 yards a carry, which isn't very good. The year before, however, he averaged 5 yards a carry. So why can't we take 2023 and say that's the best example of Kyren? But it's one season out of 2, so how relevant is this? And by the way, in both seasons, this is another telling aspect for me. In both seasons, Kyren was on the field constantly. He had an 82% snap share in 2023, which is really high. And then in 2024, he has an 86% snap share. They drafted a running back in Blake Corum that everyone was worried about taking Kyren's job. And what happened? His snap share increased. Now, how could that possibly happen when he's not that efficient of a player? Well, a lot of different reasons. Number one, just because you're not incredibly efficient doesn't mean that you're not efficient enough. And if you're efficient enough, that means that other elements of your game can make you the starter, even though you're not the most athletic person in the world or the most explosive person in the world. Now, this brings me to my second point out of 3, and that is that football players are not robots and they are not numbers on a piece of paper. They are human beings, and human beings can fall out of favor with other human beings. They can do things to impress other human beings, and none of this stuff shows up in fantasy football stats. And anyone that's coached or played sports knows this. It's not just about the numbers that you put up. It's about, are you doing what the coaches expect from someone in your position? Are you making mistakes? Now, granted, it has been pointed out, Kyren had 5 fumbles last year. So you have his fumbles, and you have the lack of explosiveness, basically, is the 2 criticisms of this player. I don't think he's the most athletic player in the league by any stretch. And I also think that he had 5 fumbles, and he's had 8 fumbles in 2 years, and that's a concern. Here's the thing, though. Just because we can't quantify something doesn't mean that it's not necessarily true. And what's true to me is that Sean McVay likes this player and what he provides for this offense. And it doesn't seem like they're trying to replace him. So when you combine that with all the statistics that he's put up the last couple of years, there's really no basis for suggesting that this player is going to get replaced. You don't put players on the field more when you're trying to replace them. That's what the Rams did last year. Kyren was on the field more after they just spent a third-round pick on a running back that was supposedly going to take touches away from him. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Players get on the field sometimes because they're exceptional athletes, and sometimes they get on the field because they're pretty good athletes, but they do everything the coaches instruct them to do, and they're great leaders and they're great teammates. That stuff is real, and that stuff matters. It doesn't translate to fantasy football on paper, but it's nonetheless relevant. Now, I don't know for a fact that Kyren is a great leader or a great teammate, or that he does everything the coaches tell him to do and executes it perfectly. I don't know all of that for a fact. But there's some things I can point to that indicate those things, or at least some of them, could be true. The snap share is a big one. And also the fact that, listen, the guy puts up stats. It's such a slap in the face to a player that puts up the numbers that this guy does and have people say, well, he's not that efficient. I'll take the numbers. That's just me. Now, the argument for all the advanced stats that Kyren's not that great at is, well, it opens the door for another player to come along and be more efficient. And I have two things to say to that. Number one, we'll examine the players that actually have a chance to do this on the Rams. But to begin my third and final point here, I'll just say that it's not as easy as people think to just look at a stat sheet and say, oh, we just need a guy that's better than this. So finding a guy like that is pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult to find a guy that amasses about 1,300 total yards and 15 touchdowns. You don't just find that guy because you just draft someone new and drop them into the backfield and they put up the same numbers. It just doesn't happen that way. And that's another reason why these metrics are fun and they're a good guide, but they don't tell the whole story. Because if they told the whole story, Kyren wouldn't be a starter, and he is. But let's look at the guys that might take his job, supposedly. You have Blake Corum, who's coming into his second year after having done not so much in his first year. A lot of people, myself included, thought that he was going to take work away from Kyren, like relevant work. 20 or 30% of the carries, or the touches in general, I thought he was going to take. It didn't turn out that way. Kyren got even more touches. So whatever Blake Corum did in year one, it wasn't enough for Sean McVay to feel like he needed to get him in the lineup right now. That being said, Kairen Williams didn't do much in his first year. Granted, he had an injury, but he didn't really make a ton of noise. He was only a fifth-round pick, so the coaches probably weren't chomping at the bit to get him in the lineup. But on the other hand, he didn't really do anything. And in year two is when he exploded. So there's nothing to say that Blake Corum can't do that. But I don't believe he had an injury excuse in his rookie year. And he just really failed to do anything when the expectations were higher for rookie Blake Corum than they were for rookie Kyren Williams. That's something to keep in mind too. So it's not impossible, but I don't look forward to Blake Corum just exploding onto the scene out of nowhere. It's just not typical. Even though running backs can take a second year leap, it's usually after you've seen something from them in year one. They usually don't fail to do anything in year one and then explode onto the scene as a full-time starter or someone that's going to take 50 or 60% of the snaps away. Then you have Jarquez Hunter, who was a fourth-round pick in a year where there was a lot of good running backs. So we could say safely that Jarquez Hunter could have been a third-round pick in this draft. We don't know for sure, but he could have been. And I thought he was a fairly talented back from what I saw. And I lumped him in with about 8 or 10 other running backs in the mid-rounds that I thought were pretty good players that could end up making some noise on teams or just fizzle out. They were kind of coin flips. Jarquez Hunter was one of them. Now, fourth-round draft capital isn't nothing, so he's going to have a chance to make his presence known in practice. However, we don't really have to get too far into the success of fourth-round running backs. It's kind of a crapshoot on a good day. So the idea that this player is going to just show up and learn the entire offense and run it well and start eating into Kyren's snap share, I'm not sure I'm believing that either, especially for this year. Next year, you never know. This year, I think it will be difficult. So let's take a bird's eye view of Kyren's competition. We have a third-round running back from last year who didn't do anything in his rookie season. And then we have a fourth-round rookie. Those are the two guys that people are worried about taking his job. I just don't really see it being a factor, especially this year. And again, they're talking about re-signing Kyren. It hasn't happened yet. It's come up twice in conversation with reporters, so you hope that they're actually working on something. My opinion is this. He is a little inefficient, so they might be waiting until mid-season to see if any of these other running backs can make some noise and possibly be the starter down the road. Now, your first reaction is probably, wait, you spent this whole video talking about how Kyren is actually good. I'm saying that the efficiency metrics are a piece of the puzzle, and they are relevant. So if someone explodes onto the scene and turns out to be more efficient than Kyren by a mile, I think they'll eventually take the job and they just leave Kyren unsigned because nobody wants to pay running backs anymore. It has nothing to do with the guy's talent or what he's done for the team. Running backs get tossed into the garbage all the time, even though they don't deserve it, even though they help teams win games. Ask Saquon Barkley. But I digress. I'm not comparing those two players. Kyren is not on that level, but he is, however, a top 12 fantasy running back that people don't want to draft until round 3. And that's a huge issue for me when he has the faith of the coaching staff. He must be doing something right because he's on the field more than any other running back in the league. You can check the snap counts. That is the truth. So the coaches must think something of him. He also isn't completely inefficient. So that's the other side that we don't hear that much, is that, yeah, he could be more efficient, but that doesn't mean he's inefficient. If he was inefficient, he wouldn't be starting. And they would be trying much harder to replace him. That's the other thing that's confusing to me about the Kyren talk, is they're not trying to replace him. They're putting him on the field all the time, and there were a ton of good running backs available in this year's draft, and the Rams didn't think it was prudent to get a hold of one until round 4. So they could have easily had a running back in the second round this year. There's no question about that. They could have had a running back in the late first, technically, if they wanted to do that. So this is just not a team that's looking for a new running back. I'm sorry, it's just not true. And also, sometimes teams just like to find certain positions through the draft and not free agency. The Rams, historically, in the last handful of years, have not signed free agent running backs. They've preferred to draft them instead. So much of this talk about worrying about Kyren being on the field is just completely unfounded. It has nothing to do with fantasy football. It just has to do with how the Rams like to draft. So all in all, I view this not as one of the riskier players in the top of the draft. I look at it as one of the safer picks in the draft. I mean, you know this guy's going to be on the field. You know he's going to be down near the goal line. Sure, they added Devontae Adams, but again, that just means their offense is going to be that much better. So maybe Kyren doesn't see quite as many touches, but maybe he punches one into the end zone 2 or 3 extra times because the Rams' offense is so good. So that doesn't really bother me when teams add good players to their offense, because it's just gravy for everyone. So to wrap this up, I see great stats. I see efficiency metrics that aren't that great, but I see a player that's not being taken off the field and doesn't have any worry about his job security. Again, maybe this will end up being an ice cold take, but I haven't heard any logical reason yet why Kyren would lose a lot of work. There just isn't one out there, and I just don't think there is one in reality. I just laid it all out. No one's coming for him, players or coaches, and he's going to be on the field all the time and scoring touchdowns. Draft him. So am I nuts? Give me the one sensible argument against Kyren besides I didn't like his underlying metrics, because underlying metrics can lie as much as other stats can. So you guys tell me what you think about Kyren. Tell me what I might be missing, or tell me if I'm right. I always like to hear that. So I'll talk to you later.